is to work out both simultaneously. So while you do need the guiding principles, a role play can allow for the unexpected in ways that are much more creative than conventional static assessments.
And the other thing that we talk about there is that whole question around who owns the learning. When we think about role play from a teaching perspective, we tend to think about, okay, what are my graduate attributes that I'm targeting? How do they fit into the course of study that I've prepared for the students? Okay, what reliable method do I have available to me to test whether they have achieved those outcomes? But the learning also belongs to the learners. And so having some opportunity within the assessment for the students to be able to articulate what the learning has been for them so that they take ownership of that. And that is, for us, a critical role of the debriefing stage of role play. And so many of the role plays that you see have a very high weighting on a debriefing report. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the 3 stages of the role play and just identify for you some of the types of assessment that we see used in each of those stages. Now, this list is not comprehensive. These are some of the more common ways. What I'm going to hopefully impress on you throughout this is don't overassess. So being in an online environment, you can actually have a record of a lot of processes that are hidden. So you've got a record of what the student has been thinking and their responses. It's just because it's there doesn't mean you have to do it. So it's not always advisable to. So avoiding that over-assessing. And the second thing is choose your assessment in line with the learning priorities. So in the briefing stage, no, just we'll stick on that one. Okay, so in the briefing stage, essentially we want to make sure that all participants are sufficiently knowledgeable of the rules and procedures and the technologies to be able to function effectively in the role play. So sometimes in order to make sure people are ready for that, there is some sort of knowledge or skill test before they even look at the scenario. So this is just about an online quiz or some sort of warm-up activity which the students then get some sort of small mark for, and that's a barrier. It's showing that they have passed that technical and procedural barrier. The other purpose of the briefing is to assist the students to get into role, because it's all of the action, all of the responses needs to be in role. And so we want to encourage students to become immersed in their role and immersed into the scenario. So quite typically, assessment items which are asking the participants to state who they are within the scenario or their position in response to the introductory aspects of a scenario. So we get role profile statements where the participant will introduce their role to the other players and perhaps identify the state that they have in the scenario. So that helps the individual participant step into role and other participants to gather useful information about who else is going to be in this action with them. You might have position papers, which could be a preliminary response to the scenario and telling what the beginning stance of the role is towards the issues. Now, in most role plays, what you want is a dynamic action. So you want the scenario to change, or you want other factors and dynamics to enter into the scenario. So if we have a position paper in the briefing, then quite typically later on we'll have some revision of that position paper or some reflection on how the stance has changed throughout the role play. Another common form of assessment is some sort of analysis of available resources, because we want the interaction phase of the role play to be informed by at least some level of research in role. And so you might get examples like participants could be asked to identify 3 websites that are helpful in representing the views of their stakeholder role, and then they might have to do some sort of analysis of what material is available there. What's more? Oh, there you go.
We're just reading Paul's comments.
Paul's, yeah. Okay, so any comments there about the briefing stage? I personally like to keep this stage of the assessment light in terms of weighting, but still there. So anything which assists the student to get into role and start to interact with the scenario, not the other participants, but interact with the scenario in role is my personal preference. Okay, the next stage, in the interaction stage, this would be the bulk of the time spent in the role play. And so you see there's a whole range of possibilities here. Depending on what stage in the academic development the participants are at, will determine how formal or how evaluative the assessment tasks in the interaction stage are. Basically, what we're going to do here is make sure that the students are rewarded for engaging authentically in the drama of the role play, and that they're doing so in an informed way. In the early days of online role play, it was quite common to give quite a high weighting to learner participation through looking at the quality and quantity of posts, and this was thought to encourage active participation. What it also did was give the moderators and facilitators a headache. You know, just because it's written doesn't mean that it has to be monitored closely. So the other point about assessing the post, the individual posts, is that you transfer the burden to the moderator or facilitator of wading through the individual messages and the bulk of individual messages, using some sort of framework for assessing the quality of it. Some of the more recent work there actually gets the student to do that. So the participant might be asked to choose, say, 5 pivotal postings from within the role play that shaped action or that changed the direction of the outcome. They're given some criteria, and it is the learner who selects and justifies their selection. So that's the analysis of the posting. Other things that might happen are things like formal submissions to some sort of inquiry or an action plan that is generated in response to issues identified. Some of the work that have done more recently is favouring giving credit for the questions that the students ask rather than the information that they give for that whole inquiry. So you can see there's a whole range of activities that potentially could be assessed